All right, so the first step is to trace a coloring page on a light box. So turn on the light box by clicking the switch on the side. Place your coloring page first, and then you will need a thick paper. So our project paper is the nice thick ones. All right, then you will begin tracing your coloring page. If you have lines that are nice and thick on your coloring page, I think the easiest thing to do is just go right in the middle of them. Like my outside of my line, it might be hard to see. It's pretty thick. Instead of tracing on both sides, I'm just gonna trace right in the middle of it. It's a little bit easier. All right, so I'm gonna do this nice and quick. Then you might want to look up a picture of whatever your coloring page was, just so we get the colors right. You're gonna have to memorize this, or you can set up your iPad on the front carts up there, but your iPad cannot be by where you are painting. So either memorize what colors you need, or have your iPad set up far away from painting, just so you can look at it later. Right, then when you are ready to start painting, you're gonna need to grab your brushes, and you will be taking your paper to each of the tables of paint that you need to use. Since I am painting some small areas, I have some smaller brushes. So I have my orange brush, a yellow brush, and like a blue brush. Any of these are nice and small, and they will work. So tiny little spots like the eyeballs and the nostrils that are super tiny, I'm probably gonna use this blue brush. Then for my bigger areas like the eyebrows, the horns, and the face, I need a little bit of a bigger brush, so either one of these would work really great. If I use too big of a brush for a small area, you're gonna get outside of the lines. All right, so when I start painting, I'm gonna make sure I'm dipping it in, trying to get it just on the bristles. Okay, and then I like to go around the outside first of my area. So I'm gonna start painting, kind of creating like an outline. So going very slow around the outline. And then when I get to these points that I need a smaller brush, I'm gonna just hold my brush a little bit different just to get those small areas. Okay, then I'm gonna keep on going around the outside. Okay, I got some globs of paint over here that I'm gonna move down to keep going. Sometimes you might be able to just flip your brush over and there's plenty of paint on the other side. Okay, I'm gonna just wipe off all the extra paint that I have on my brush. Then I'm gonna dip in again and keep going with my outline. So sometimes I like to work in little sections, like I might paint just this part of the jaw first and then move on to this side. It kind of depends on what the picture is. So when we're painting, we're gonna make sure we have no globs. So I'm gonna keep going and smoothing this out. If you make sure you have no globs, you're gonna be able to see your pencil lines, and that's what we want. We wanna be able to see your pencil lines. So keep going, smooth out any of the tiny little globs. It's gonna be so important. So anywhere I have globs, I'm smoothing it out. When my brush is all the way dry, that's when I go get more paint. Okay, so if my brush is all the way dry, I'm gonna grab more paint, keep on going with my little outline and getting in the middle. All right, so I am gonna finish painting the rest of what I need with my blue color. And I'm gonna be doing kind of the same thing, making outlines and then filling in the middle, making sure I smooth out any globs of paint. So I'm really smoothing out tiny, tiny globs only get paint if your brush is all the way dry. All right, before I am gonna switch colors, I'm gonna just make sure I have all my globs of paint smoothed out. So I don't really have a wet brush. I don't have a lot of paint on it, but I'm just going over any parts that have little globs of paint. So even the tiniest little globs of paint I am smoothing out. Okay, this is gonna help it dry and just look the best if we have no globs of paint. All right, then when you're ready to wash your brush, because you're gonna switch to a different color, I'm gonna take my brush with my water. There's little bumps on the bottom, so I'm gonna scrub it over the little bumps. Then I think it helps if you dry off your brush. So I'm gonna dry off my brush with a paper towel. Okay. Then I'm ready to switch to my next color. I have it kind of memorized in my head. I think I am going to do this darker blue for the nose. So once again, I'm gonna kind of create an outline around and then fill in the middle. So I'm being very careful. My little nostrils on my nose are gonna be painted black, but black goes nicely over every color. So I'm just painting over these little nostrils. I can still see them, but I am just gonna paint over them with black. If you ever have extra paint, so I have kind of a lot of paint on here, I'm gonna just run my brush over them. It's gonna collect on my brush, then I can wipe it off on the side of here. That way I don't have all these globs of paint, because I had a little too much. All right, so there's my nose. Now I'm gonna wash my brush and switch to my tan. I'm gonna just speed up the tan. Okay, now I'm going in with my last little details, which is the black, and I'm using my tiny little brush. So with this, what I'm painting is super tiny. I gotta do the nostrils. If there is ever paint on the side, I would use paint on the side, especially when you're using a tiny brush. Otherwise, when we dip it in, we end up getting way up too high or we get too much paint. So if there's paint on the side, use that paint when you're with a small brush. All right, then I'm gonna just carefully try and paint the eyeballs. Okay, so I got all my stuff painted. Now you may be wondering about all my pencil lines and, oops, I just spilled. And on our coloring page, we see all these black lines. So I have a special marker that we can do those black lines with, but your project needs to be fully dry before we use my special marker. It's an ink pen. Sharpies cannot go over paint because it sucks up all the ink in the Sharpie way too fast. So I have these special pens that we can use, but all the paint has to be perfectly dry before we can do that. So I'm gonna let this dry, then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so my paper is dry now and I have my ink marker. So I have these hidden away in a special spot because if we don't use them correctly, it is a giant mess. So to use this, there is a cap on the top. You're gonna pull straight up to take out the cap. Do not twist this part, the white part below. That will create a giant mess. So just pull straight up with your cap. this. Okay. Then if you ever have where your marker is not working, grab a paper towel. If you press down on the paper towel, it's going to create like a puddle. Then it should start to make the ink get this little tip wet again. So if it ever doesn't work, grab a paper towel, press down on it once, and then you should get this little puddle. Okay, so with my special ink marker, I can trace over all the lines, and it's basically like a Sharpie. But we can't use Sharpies because it'll dry out the Sharpies really fast, and they already dry out fast enough. So you're gonna just trace over any of these lines. If you want to create them thicker, you can go over it a couple times. The only thing we have to be careful about is this ink does take a little bit of time to dry. So if you like make a line, make sure you don't rub your hand over it. Okay, because it'll take a little bit of time to dry. So I am going to finish marking all of my pencil lines with this marker, and it's going to give my Sully like a cartoon look. Okay, you may be wondering why we didn't do the black lines first. It's because if we do the black lines first, they are gonna smear with the paint. So that's why we have to do the black lines last with the marker. Then once you are all done, make sure you put the cap on the marker, and then you are good. Also, I forgot to say in the beginning of the video, we need to write our name on the back. So if it is dry, write your name on the back, but you should do that to begin with.